Неадекватна особа, бо адекватна людина не може піти війною проти іншої держави повномасштабно. Він неадекватна, або він знав, що йому за це нічого не буде, а значить були ті чи інші діалоги з іншими країнами. І про це я навіть не хочу думати, бо це просто, просто тоді це не партнерство, а гра за спиною, і це зрадництво, повне зрадництво. Тому давайте подумаємо все ж таки, що у нього не було домовленості.
What happens to your country if this American aid doesn't arrive?
Ask me, is it worth it? Here's what we've gotten for our investment. We haven't lost one soldier. We've reduced the combat power of the Russian army by 50%.
Russia has lost. They've lost strategically, operationally, and tactically, and they are paying an enormous price on the battlefield.
To those who would try to oppose socialism on the United States, we again deliver a very simple message. America will never be a socialist country.
Hey, it's me, and welcome to this video. Now, the cocaine smurf, ZELENSKYY, the other day said that he thinks that there was some kind of an agreement with the Biden regime and the Russian Federation to give them part of Ukraine, and that they organized the thing. And he comes up with that now in the middle of 2024, when even I made a video more than a year ago saying the same thing, because that meeting between Biden and Putin in 2021 in Switzerland was kind of odd. You know, you had Putin coming out with a very long press conference. You had Biden coming out shouting at reporters, but also saying how he was discussing that Russia shouldn't touch 5 critical areas of our infrastructure. And at the time I was saying, well, why is he saying 5? Does that mean that Russia can attack all the other infrastructure areas? But that discussion in itself is kind of weird. Now, it turns out that in that meeting, they were carving up Ukraine, where Putin said, we're going in, it's going to be a limited incursion. And the Biden regime says, okay, but keep it a limited incursion, but we're going to do sanctions, we're going to finance and arm Ukraine, we're going to get corporations to leave your nation, your economy will suffer. And Putin was like, okay, do what you must. But essentially, Biden later in Europe said in a press conference that there's a difference between a full-scale invasion and a limited incursion. And Russia did a special operation, not a full-scale invasion, as Ukraine claims. You know, look, if the Russian Federation wanted to invade and occupy Ukraine, they would have done so. But they went in with a special operation, kind of surgical, and they were crafty and creative about it. And I talked about that in various videos. But now in 2024, you have ZELENSKYY saying, well, the USA made an agreement with Russia that part of Ukraine will become the Russian Federation. This has happened because those areas, the land bridge, really, they voted to join the Russian Federation. It's a done deal. Ukraine will not get back that territory. So you have the West actually pushing for war, then perpetuating the war, even killing any peace talks or even any hints at peace talks, because they wanted more Ukrainians to die, because then you have more billions that can be spent and all these people get more kickbacks. So it really comes down to money. We're talking about politicians in Europe and in our nation just getting rich off of Ukrainians dying, because that's really what it is. And if you look at a more nefarious part of it, for the WEF, for the EU, you know, they see Ukraine as being a nation of white Christians. They see Russia as a nation of white Christians. So they don't even care how many Ukrainians or how many Russians die, because in the end, they're all white Christians. And as you can see, the agenda in our nation, also in Europe, is to diminish the white Christian population. So for them, it works on all sides to have as many Ukrainians die, and if Russians die, that's good too. They like that. And so you have lies coming out from the media, and the purpose is always to make Ukrainians believe like they still have a chance. And I mean the Ukrainian population, to get people to join the armed forces, to go into the meat grinders, and if they don't go voluntarily, they will be kidnapped off of the streets and be sent there by force, and then they just die in the meat grinders because they're going up against the Russian Federation. And I cannot begin to tell you how this is a no-win situation for Ukraine. And it's true, they wasted thousands and thousands of people in no-win battles, especially the counteroffensive recently. Instead of having one major attack, they had almost 50 little attacks where all their armored vehicles and tanks got stuck in minefields in designated kill zones where the artillery is zeroed in, and so many people died needlessly. But why did this counteroffensive even happen? It's because the media wanted it to justify more aid so that all these people can get more kickbacks. That's all it was. Because the Ukraine armed forces did not have the capability to do a major offensive, that it would have been smarter to dig in and to kind of defend what's left of Ukraine. But no, you had to do a counteroffensive. And the lead up, it was months and months. You know, the mythical counteroffensive will soon begin. And everybody was so hyping it that I laughed. It was almost like they were talking about the Battle of 5 Armies, and all these millions of Ukrainians will come out of the fog riding on magical unicorns to defeat the Russian Federation, right, and drive them back to Moscow. And it did not happen. And I knew that even before the counteroffensive or the set of counterattacks, attacks that were no-win attacks, right, occurred. I was like, why would they even try? And then they tried and failed, of course. But if I could have predicted that, then they could too, and they still did it anyway. So I feel bad for all those Ukrainians that died. They have families, they have sons and daughters, they had a life, and then suddenly it's snuffed out. So politicians in DC can get their kickbacks, and defense industries can build more weapons. And I'm all for, you know, having justified wars or special operations. In fact, I'm on the side of the IDF cleaning house in Gaza. I'm in favor of Russia doing a special operation to denazify the Ukraine armed forces, but also to create that land bridge. They were provoked, the both of them, and they were justified. So I'm not against armed conflict. It's a part of life, and it's part of human nature. But what I cannot stand is needlessly provoking a war and then having the war be like a business where you don't care how many people die, that in fact you encourage more people to die so you can get more kickbacks. I mean, that is sick. I mean, this conflict is really sick on the Ukrainian side. And of course they installed an actor because it was all about the appearances, right? Like I said, foreign leaders going to Kyiv and standing next to the cocaine smurf, and all these Ukrainians dying for nothing. It's a terrible thing. And then to see all the media putting out the narratives that Ukraine can win, or Russia's so evil, and war crimes, and making up stuff, and U.S. politicians, even chairman of the Joint Chiefs back then, Mark Milley Cyrus, saying Russia completely lost. They lost the war. And it's not true. I mean, why are they saying it if it's not true? It's because they still want to perpetuate the war. But this was ill-conceived. And what really happened in Switzerland in 2021 is that Putin played Biden. because I think the Biden regime really thought if they do heavy sanctions and they arm and finance the Ukraine armed forces, that Russia would really suffer. In fact, Biden thought the ruble would crash. But the opposite happened. Russia was prepared, they handled the sanctions, and they're still selling oil and gas to the EU, just like before, just through a proxy. In some cases, not even. And so we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline to sabotage Russia. And that was kind of like a red line that was crossed, and many more were crossed. And that is because the impotence of NATO, the impotence of the Biden regime, they got played by Russia. Because Russia made it seem like they were going to attack Kyiv, then they didn't, and just took the whole south, which was the agreement. But what the Biden regime didn't know is that they would also take Bakhmut, Avdiivka, that they would advance in such a way that they didn't suffer. So when you hear Lindsey Graham saying, well, Russia lost 50% of its combat power, that's not what happened. That's what they thought would happen. So almost everything in the narratives of the media and the politicians, the intel agencies, it's always like what they thought would happen, but didn't actually happen, but then they still say it anyway. It's almost like that, everything prepared in their play. But then in Act 2 and Act 3 of the play, Russia decided to write the script. And they're all like, hey, wait a second, that wasn't the deal. So you see the arrogance of NATO, and they're scared because they don't want to be involved in a hot war with Russia, but they want to do more and they feel impotent. It really is kind of like if you beat up somebody and then they're lying down and you walk away, but they still have enough to kind of like get up. The pride takes over, right? And they're like, hey, you come back. This time I'm really going to beat you up, right? And then if that person does walk back, then it's like, no, I didn't mean it. Never mind. Or worse, there's a second beating. So Russia is always putting out the feelers or the intention to have negotiations, to have peace. And it's always been obstructed by Western Europe, by the Biden regime, because there's still many kickbacks, right? So the $60 billion has been approved, so it also means it has to be spent, and people will have to have their kickbacks. So I repeat, it's just a business. It's not a real conflict. It's not about democracy. Ukraine is a military dictatorship. It's not about democracy. It's not about our national security. All those fairy tales about how Russia is going to take all of Ukraine, then they're going to go into Poland, and then into Germany, then they're going to invade France and cross the channel and invade Britain. And some people actually believe that, right? It's like, oh, what a beautiful story. And then other people are like talking about the Soviets. The Soviet Union ended a long time ago. Communism is not in power in Russia at all. And you even have the Biden regime rewriting history. You had some Biden officials saying how in World War II we fought against the Nazis and the communists. Yeah, saying that we were fighting against Germany and Russia. But Russia was our ally in World War II, right? And part of that is to kind of try to humiliate Russia. But some people actually believe it, just like some people thought Cleopatra is like a black woman. And it's, of course, not true. But we're also talking about low IQ people, DEI people, people in the Pentagon that shouldn't have been promoted. Lloyd Austin is a complete doofus. You thought Mark Milley Cyrus was a dummy. What about Bladder Boy, Lloyd Austin? I mean, the guy's wearing Pampers now. But it's not just him, it's General Q, who's the replacement of Mark Milley Cyrus, and all these DEI generals, TV generals, they're all just putting out talking points, like they're all working for MSNBC or CNN. They're not real soldiers, right? And they don't understand what is really going on. Whereas Russia, when it comes to the armed forces, they are extremely careful to protect their flanks, to minimize casualties. So the real numbers are that Ukraine loses 10 times more people on the battlefield than Russia. And Russia has come to the stage with amazingly few casualties. Now, the one battle in the many months where Russia lost a lot of people was Bakhmut. But there, the Russian armed forces didn't use their own soldiers, except for the flanks, but going into Bakhmut was the Wagner PMC. That's a private company. They're mercenaries. That's not the Russian army. So yes, they took a lot of casualties going in, taking Bakhmut, which Ukraine never thought they would lose. But guess what? Russia made it that some private company takes the hits, right? All the casualties were a lot of ex-prisoners and not the Russian armed forces. So that was also by design. And because of that, the leaders of Wagner also got very upset, then mounted kind of like a mini coup. And all those leaders died in a plane explosion months later, right? And they deserved it. But what I'm saying is that Russia is very careful. So when they are in a position where they feel like they could be outflanked, even by the incompetent Ukrainians, they will pull back. I mean, they're being smart about the whole thing, and they're letting the artillery do the talking. And you heard of the meat grinders, but did you hear about the meat tenderizers? That's really the artillery. And the gliding bombs, they really take no chances. And it's pretty amazing how Russia advances. You know, I've seen a lot of movements, and I'm not an expert in military tactics, but even I can see that they're always being very sure when they surround the city, when they go in. They really make it that the Ukrainians are allowed to escape. If they don't, they get decimated. And the MO has been the same. Mariupol, Bakhmut, Severodonetsk, Avdiivka, Marinka, they always use the same techniques I saw, and that is to minimize casualties. So the Russian armed forces are very experienced now. I would say it's now the best army in the world, and they don't have a recruiting problem because not only is the Russian Federation really taking care of its soldiers, they're also making sure that the battle tactics are not, crazy attacks that what the Soviets would do, what even the desperate Germans would do in World War II. Those days are long gone. We're talking about the Russian armed forces going in with an advantage of 3-1, 5-1. Like I said, letting the artillery do the talking, and to use a psychological aspect of it, kind of like the Mongols. And Ukraine doesn't have many good forces left. The best troops they had died in 2022, 2023. And the better troops that they still have left, they're kept in reserve because you don't want to waste all your best people, right? So they're sending raw recruits, people kidnapped off of the streets to the front lines, and they don't last very long because Ukraine knows that they have no chance. But yet, like I say, you have all these people perpetuating this thing because of the kickbacks. And so Zelenskyy has no power. He never had any power. They just put him out there because he has some on-TV charisma. He's an actor after all. But when it comes down to it, Ukraine lost its sovereignty a long time ago. Even 2014, they had a coup, and that was the beginning of the end. Now the EU, NATO, the Biden regime, they control Ukraine. Ukraine cannot survive anymore without foreign help. The money, but also the rest of it. Ukraine has ceased to be a real nation. And of course, BlackRock and Vanguard and all the others, they want to go in there and rebuild Ukraine. And NATO always had the idea to go into Western Ukraine. In fact, You already have 2 or 3 NATO bases that are NATO bases without the name, without the flag. And I think that could still happen, that NATO kind of moves into Western Ukraine. I don't know if that was part of the deal discussed in 2021 between Putin and the Biden regime, that it kind of divided Ukraine in two. We'll have to wait and see. I think it was about 15% of Ukraine, and that was supposed to be it, which doesn't include Odessa. But you never know what will happen. And it's also true that Russia can still do what it wants, right? They have moved in and they're creating a buffer zone, but they could still go for Kharkov or Odessa or even Kyiv. They could take half of Ukraine. It's really up to them, but it's also up to NATO. Are they going to keep on pushing for World War III or not? And that's why the election is also important. President Trump can prevent World War III. And I think that's why Russia's kind of building a buffer zone, and they're ready for peace talks, because they know if Trump is in office, it's different. Everything changes. Even Ukraine knows that. But Ukraine as a nation was never legitimate in the first place, and you can see just how quickly that is exposed. The nationalism of Ukrainians is a construct. It's artificial. It's a Azov-inspired nationalism that actually has its roots in the Waffen SS. So that's not a good thing. And the Russian Federation, they've been justified, and in fact they should have gone in earlier, 2016, 2017, but they did not. And you know why. It's called President Donald J. Trump. And so they, of course, don't want President Trump to be in office, because then they're not as free. But now they did what they did, and you can make dirty deals with Democrats, but you cannot make dirty deals with President Donald J. Trump and his administration, because they actually do things the right way. So the Ukraine situation should end now. I don't see Ukraine as being a nation that should survive. At best, it could become a vassal state of the European Union with NATO bases in West Ukraine. And at worst, it could be carved up in two, cease to exist, where the Russian Federation has half of Ukraine, NATO's on the other side, and they have like a kind of a Berlin Wall, but instead of a wall, it would be like a river, and that would be the new border, and then we'd have a kind of Cold War. And maybe that's what NATO really wants. Maybe that's what the Biden regime really wants, and the neocons. But I don't know if that will really happen, especially if we're going to have a new administration, a Trump administration.
Shadowy flight into the dangerous world of a man who does not exist. A young loner on a crusade to champion the cause of the innocent, the helpless, the powerless, in a world of criminals who operate above the law.